History as it happens, June 27, 2025. Visions of mushroom clouds.
We must be ready for a new danger, the atomic bomb.
The purpose of these bases can be none other than to provide a nuclear strike capability against the Western Hemisphere.
North Korea will freeze and then dismantle its nuclear program. South Korea and our other allies will be better protected.
We've tried bilateral negotiations with North Korea. My predecessor, in a good faith effort, entered into a framework agreement. The United States honored its side of the agreement. North Korea didn't.
Libya possesses a huge and varied arsenal, including chemical agents and raw nuclear material.
Libya's prime minister says Muammar Gaddafi has been killed.
Iran is so dangerous. Weeks away from having the fissile material for an entire arsenal of nuclear bombs.
It would seem to be in everyone's interest that no additional countries acquire nuclear weapons, and the Non-Proliferation Treaty obligates the countries that do have nukes to reduce their stockpiles. Yet in our world today, several nation-states believe they may need the bomb to survive, jeopardizing what's left of the non-proliferation regime and potentially returning us to a dangerous time. That's next as we report history as it happens. I'm Martin DeCaro.
Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated.
The same machines, the centrifuges, that can enrich uranium to low levels, 3%, 4% for fuel, can also enrich it to high levels for bombs, 90% purity. And so the question comes down to, do you trust Iran? Well, clearly we don't. We believe correctly that Iran's civilian program is a cover to develop nuclear capabilities.
If you were growing up during the coldest years of the Cold War, you would have seen a civil defense film like this one.
Dum dum, beetle dum dum, beetle dum dum, beetle dum dum. There was a turtle by the name of Bert.
Starring Bert the Turtle, who dispensed some valuable advice. If an atom bomb blows up near you, hit the deck.
He's duck and cover, duck and cover.
He did what we all must learn to do. You
and you
and you.
Now, from our vantage today, this seems so silly. Ducking and covering under a desk can't protect you from the kinds of weapons that, say, Russia has pointed at American cities.
Be sure and remember what Bert the Turtle just did, friends, because every one of us must remember to do the same thing. That's what this film is all about. Duck and cover. This is an official civil defense film produced...
But if you were around back then, you didn't have to be paranoid to envision mushroom clouds. You would have remembered Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The arms race between the U.S. and Soviet Union was out of control. And the Berlin crisis of 1958, followed by the Cuban Missile Crisis, brought the superpowers to the brink.
The Cuban waterfront bristled with guns as the United States moved against Russian missile bases on that island fortress.
In his new book, The World of the Cold War, historian Vladislav Zubok writes, the lessons of Berlin and especially the Cuban crisis had a significant impact on Western and Soviet policymakers for 3 decades, until the very end of the Cold War. Crisis management required quick and safe communication channels, the first secure phone connection between the Kremlin and the White House. Unbridled nuclear brinkmanship stopped. Khrushchev stopped pressing for a free city in Berlin and a German peace treaty. After intense negotiations, in 1963, the United States, Soviet Union, and UK reached a nuclear test ban on the ground, underwater, in the atmosphere, or in space. This was the first tangible act to limit the arms race, and created a precedent for other talks and agreements. Vladislav Zubok writing in his new book, The World of the Cold War.
So let us not be blind to our differences, but let us also direct attention to our common interests and the means by which those differences can be resolved. And if we cannot end now our differences, at least we can help make the world safe for diversity. For in the final analysis, our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's future. And we are all mortal.
Well, today, almost all the landmark arms control treaties have either expired or been abrogated. A new nuclear arms race is underway among the existing nuclear powers. as the world confronts the difficulty of preventing new states from joining the nuclear club, like Iran.
Ladies and gentlemen, I've been speaking about the need to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons for over 15 years.
And when it comes to Iran's nuclear ambitions, history may serve as a warning. About 20 years ago, believing it must build nukes for its security, North Korea exited the non-proliferation treaty and tested a bomb in 2006. And that was about 20 years after Pyongyang had joined the non-proliferation regime. During the 1990s, the Clinton administration grappled with how to block North Korea's road to a bomb. Here is the president, April 1994, at a town hall meeting in Charlotte, North Carolina, taking some tough questions about his diplomatic efforts.
Mr. President, several months ago, November of last year, you said we will not allow North Korea to build a nuclear weapon. We now believe that there are at least 2 nuclear weapons and possibly a third. When you say we will not allow them to build it, what are you willing to do to stop them? Well, and what are you willing to do now that we believe they have them?
Well, the intelligence community believes now something they did not believe at that time, which is that they may have a rudimentary nuclear weapon, which may or may not even be deliverable, but which may be a bomb in a literal sense. That may or may not have happened. You've seen that in the press. We have to see what our options are. One of the things we can do is to continue to put economic pressure on North Korea. But if we do it through the United Nations, we have to carry along with us the South Koreans. After all, the South Koreans have the biggest stake. We have the next biggest stake because we have 40,000 soldiers in Korea.
Several months later, October 1994, a breakthrough.
This is a good deal for the United States. North Korea will freeze and then dismantle its nuclear program. South Korea and our other allies will be better protected. The entire world will be safer as we slow the spread of nuclear weapons.
The United States and North Korea signed the Agreed Framework. The communist dictatorship, which had already produced 1 or 2 bombs according to the CIA, committed to freezing its illicit plutonium weapons project, and would stop building nuclear reactors. Washington promised sanctions relief and economic aid, plus 2 light water reactors for civilian energy production. The agreement seemed to save the non-proliferation regime established by the NPT in 1968. It didn't last.
Last night, the government of North Korea proclaimed to the world that it had conducted a nuclear test. We're working to confirm North Korea's claim.
Bill Clinton was succeeded by George W. Bush in 2001, whose hawkish advisors argued North Korea was lying about its compliance with that 1994 agreement. And North Korea's leaders reacted to what they viewed as U.S. belligerence. Remember, Bush said the country was part of an axis of evil.
North Korea is a regime arming with missiles and weapons of mass destruction while starving its citizens.
Diplomacy would continue in the form of the 6-party talks chaired by China. And in September 2005, its members agreed to a joint declaration in which North Korea committed to abandon its pursuit of nuclear weapons. And the U.S. announced it had no intention of attacking North Korea. The following year, Pyongyang carried out its first nuclear test. But diplomacy would continue even after this, under Bush, Obama, and Trump. None of it resulted in North Korea agreeing to give up its nukes.
Now North Korea's reckless pursuit of nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles threatens the entire world with unthinkable loss of human life.
So North Korea did the opposite of Libya under dictator Muammar Gaddafi. He gave up his nuclear ambitions. His regime has since been swept into the dustbin of history, a warning to other despotic regimes, it has been said, such as Iran's today. Another supposed lesson looms over all of this. Ukraine, after the end of the Cold War, also agreed to cede the Soviet missiles left on its territory, but Ukraine really didn't have much choice there, and that was a different time. Now, the clerical regime in Tehran does not have any nuclear weapons, but there's evidence it's been moving in that direction. The International Atomic Energy Agency reported on June 12th, the same day Israel started the war, that Iran was not cooperating. The agency could not provide assurances that Iran's nuclear program was for peaceful purposes. And that brings us to another problem. Who to believe? Benjamin Netanyahu's been saying Iran is close to building a bomb for the past 30 years. Comedian Jon Stewart had some fun with this recently.
Iran is months away from having a nuclear bomb, says Netanyahu. in 2012.
But just because Netanyahu or Trump can't be trusted, that doesn't mean Iran can be trusted. And this nuclear problem is bigger than Iran, and it involves not only repressive authoritarian regimes. Our guest in this episode says some U.S. allies are thinking about going nuclear to guarantee their own security. If your rival has them, you need to get them too. That is the logic of mutually assured destruction.
Deterrence is the art of producing in the mind of the enemy the fear to attack.
Joe Cirincione is an expert on the history of the nuclear age and a career arms control specialist. He's one of the few Americans to have visited Iran's Isfahan facility, which was one of the 3 bombed by the U.S. last week. He also writes the Strategy and History newsletter on Substack.
I'm Serena Williams, and I'm healthier on Ro. I've lost 34 pounds in a year with GLP-1s, diet, and exercise. On Ro, you can access GLP-1 options, including the first FDA-approved GLP-1 pill for weight loss. Go to ro.co/journey to see if you qualify. 14 to 20% average weight loss in 1 year in non-diabetics with obesity or overweight with a weight-related medical condition versus 2.2% to 3.1% in placebo arm. RX only. To stay informed about serious side effects, go to ro.co/safety.
Joe Cirincione, welcome back, my friend.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me back on.
Our favorite subject to discuss, the existential threat to human civilization under...
You know, when I come on a show like this, people say, Joe, it's good to see you. And I go, really?
Yeah, exactly.
Usually when I come on, it's bad news.
Although in this case, the country in question doesn't have any nuclear weapons yet. I guess that is the issue. So, I was thinking about something, and the reason I wanted to have you on, among other issues we'll tackle here. But number one, something that I'm not capable of answering. It deals with Iran's capability and the potential rush to a nuclear bomb. And I will point out that you're one of the only Americans to have visited the Isfahan uranium conversion site in Iran. You were there 20 years ago. Yes. And my question is, if Iran were to develop some crude nuclear device, which is an emerging consensus right now after the U.S. bombing raid, that might be the best thing they can come up with in a short time window. Don't these weapons have to be tested? I mean, how sophisticated is something like this? Is it just you create it and then you can launch it on a missile immediately because you have to have a delivery system too? Help us understand what this whole idea of a Iranian threat is.
Sure. The problem that we face with Iran is that Iran says it has a peaceful nuclear program, meaning it has a reactor at Bushehr. For a while, it was the only nuclear reactor in the Middle East. It started under the Shah. The West Germans built that reactor. Ayatollah comes into power, he stops it, but then Iran is attacked by Iraq, and they wage a bloody 8-year war, and no one comes to their aid. Iraq uses chemical weapons against them. The Reagan administration actually vetoed the UN resolution condemning the use of chemical weapons by Iraq. So Iran recalculates. Maybe we do need a nuclear program, which the Shah had begun. So the Ayatollah restarts in secret the nuclear program and other non-conventional programs, chemical, biological weapons. The war drags on. None of these weapons come to fruition. The war ends after 8 bloody years. Iran loses 1 million people. The program still continues. Part of that is to develop the open program, the Bushehr reactor. The Russians come in and pick it up, and they start helping them build it. And Iran says, as part of this program, we need to enrich uranium for fuel. And here's the core of the problem. The same machines, the centrifuges, that can enrich uranium to low levels, 3%, 4% for fuel, can also enrich it to high levels for bombs, 90% purity. And so the question comes down to, do you trust Iran? Well, clearly we don't. We believe correctly that Iran's civilian program is a cover to develop nuclear capabilities. Now, after the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003, Iran decides, after they discover American troops on their borders, maybe we should negotiate this.
Yeah, and so also the potential for an Iraqi nuclear program at that point is now completely gone. Although it had been dismantled in 1991, we didn't quite believe that story, although it was true. But now Iraq can't, there's no more Saddam Hussein after the 2003 invasion, so Iraq can no longer threaten Iran with a nuke. Go ahead.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And, Iran is always in America's crosshairs. It's in Israel's crosshairs. So they say, okay, let's settle this. They table a proposal to the United States via the Swiss ambassador to negotiate their very small program at that point. They had about 164 centrifuges in 2003.
How many do they have now before the bombing, anyway?
Somewhere between 20 and 30,000.
Wow.
Yeah, right. So it's grown, right? They decide that they want to negotiate not just the nuclear program, but the whole thing. They're looking for the grand bargain, as they say, their relationship with Israel, their relationship with Saudi Arabia, their support for allied groups, Hezbollah, Hamas, PLO, the whole thing in the region. We're not interested. John Bolton gets that proposal. He tears it up. Vice President Cheney says, we don't negotiate with evil, we defeat it.
As we continue to work for peace, we must not and will not ignore the darkening shadows of the situations in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Syria, and in Iran, and the forces there that are working to derail the hopes of the world.
We're just going to roll through the Middle East in serial regime change, overthrow one tyrant after another, including the Ayatollah. Well, we know how that worked out, right? Doesn't work out. But still, Iran starts to negotiate with the Europeans, unsettled. The program starts to grow incrementally, but it gets up to 20,000 centrifuges by 2014 when Barack Obama comes in and he says, okay, let's settle this. We don't think there's a good military option here. And they considered all the military options, including the use of these big bunker busters.
That's right. In 2009, Obama revealed to the world that the Fordo site was buried.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Iran is breaking rules that all nations must follow, endangering the global non-proliferation regime, denying its own people access to the opportunity they deserve, and threatening the stability and security of the region and the world.
It was buried under a mountain. No one knew about that, but go ahead.
So Iran, pursuing the idea that this is a peaceful civilian program, says, well, we have a right to this, which, by the way, under international law, they do.
Yes, they are a signatory of the NPT,
which allows for the peaceful use of nuclear technology. So they do have a right to it. The question is, do you trust them? And as I say, we don't. They secretly build a plant in Natanz. We discover that. They secretly build the plant in Fordo. We discover that. They have a history of cheating. We have a history of discovering their cheating. Sanctions are imposed, et cetera, et cetera. Finally, the sanctions aren't working. There is no good military option. And Obama negotiates a deal, the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. It takes about a year to do this.
A comprehensive long-term deal with Iran that will prevent it from obtaining a nuclear weapon. This deal demonstrates that American diplomacy can bring about real and meaningful change that makes our country and the world safer and more secure.
This basically solves the problem. I've been doing non-proliferation for a very long time. This is the toughest, most enforceable non-proliferation agreement I've ever seen. It shrinks the program. It takes it down from 20,000 centrifuges down to 5,000 centrifuges. It limits the kinds of centrifuges. They can only use their basic primitive centrifuges, what they call the IR1s, not the fancier, more advanced centrifuges they're developing. It takes the 10,000 kilograms of uranium gas that they have manufactured by that time, and it says they have to export it all or blend it down to fuel, and so they're left with a mere 300 kilograms of low-enriched uranium. You know what you can do with 300 kilograms of low-enriched uranium? Squat. You can't do anything with it. It's a face saver for them.
Yeah, I'm glad you were able to answer that question because I have no idea what you can do.
So then they have to take out the core of the Arak reactor, A-R-A-K reactor that they were developing as a research reactor, but that can produce plutonium, the other fuel for a bomb. And they have to take the core out, drill it full of holes, fill it with concrete. That path is blocked. The uranium path is blocked. The program is frozen for a good 25 years. They can do some things after 15 years. They can do some things after 20 years, but the program's basically blocked for 25 years. And we get an inspection regime that puts the entire thing in an iron box under lock and camera. We know exactly what they're doing. So this solves the problem until 2018, when Donald Trump comes in and he listens to the hardline hawks in America and Benjamin Netanyahu, who doesn't like this deal.
I oppose this deal because I want to prevent war. And this deal will bring war. It will spark a nuclear arms race in the region, and it would feed Iran's terrorism and aggression. That would make war perhaps the most horrific war of all, far more likely.
And they claim that they can get a bigger, better deal, a so-called perfect deal, where Iran would not be allowed to enrich a bit of uranium. They would not be able to have 1,000 or 5,000 centrifuges. They insist on zero. And it's the old scam. You pose the perfect deal as the goal in order to kill the good deal that you've already gotten. Trump tears it up, promises that his program of maximum pressure, sanctions, threats of military force, will convince Iran to come back to the bargaining table and basically surrender. They don't.
Yeah, utter failure.
Nothing replaces it. Complete failure.
Total failure.
Biden comes in and he doesn't move the ball at all.
No, he
Biden
failed
just
as well.
Basically, he wastes his 4 years. Nothing happens. He doesn't rejoin the deal. He too blusters about, getting a longer, stronger deal. Nothing happens.
We've laid out for the people, for the leadership of Iran, what we're willing to accept in order to get back in the JCPOA. We're waiting for the response. When that will come, I'm not certain, but we are not going to wait forever.
Enter Trump 2. He now, to his credit, decides that he's the master deal maker. He can bargain with Iran, and he starts an Iranian negotiation, and the Iranians are interested. They would like to have a deal. They're in trouble, right? Israel has decimated Hamas and Hezbollah. Assad, one of the key allies in the region, has fallen. This is not a good picture for Iran.
They hold none of the cards right now.
Right, except for this massive nuclear program. Because when Trump leaves the deal, after waiting a year to see if he'll go back in, Iran starts accelerating its program. So they now have tens of thousands of centrifuges, and not just the primitive ones that they had back during the JCPOA days, but they got advanced centrifuges, third generation, fourth generation. They got what they call the IR6, brand new, state-of-the-art centrifuges that can enrich much faster than their original designs. They've accumulated thousands of kilograms of uranium, including, and this is key, 400 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60%, very close to bomb grade. But Trump says, okay, let's solve this deal. We can make a deal, and he starts negotiations. Benjamin Netanyahu sees this, and this is the last thing he wants. For 30 years, he's wanted to attack Iran. He wants to end not their nuclear program, but the regime itself. Yes. This is the only way he believes Israel will be safe. And so he tells Trump he's going to attack. Trump doesn't like it, but on June 13th, Israel launches the attacks.
Yeah, just to jump to the end here. Yeah, Trump joins in the bombing raid on Fordo and the other sites. And now, as the dust, no pun intended, is settling, Joe Cirincione, it's becoming somewhat apparent that the program was not obliterated. We don't really know the extent of the damage. That's going to take some time, if ever, right? Because these facilities are underground and the regime in Tehran has no incentive to broadcast what happened. But I guess, just to go back to my question, and you did a wonderful... You did a wonderful job of recapping the last 50 years of Iranian nukes, right? If you develop some crude device, don't these things need to be tested? You just attach it to a missile and launch it? I mean, what's the science here?
So this is where we are, and this is the crux of the issue about whether we've had debates about whether military actions can effectively end another country's program, and presidents have debated military strikes against a number of countries, China in 1964, North Korea, Iran, long debate. People like me have always taken the position there is no military solution, you have to negotiate this, and here's why. You attack. Your military in no way is going to be able to totally eliminate the program. It will at best drive it underground and at worst accelerate it. And so here's the situation you have right now. They have this 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium. The IAEA tells us Iran moved it from the underground sites. We do not know where it is. The IAEA doesn't know where it is. Iran has other underground sites that have not been attacked. We know this. They probably have centrifuges in that. We strongly believe that to be true. You could take enriched uranium, enriched to 60%, put it back in some of these modern centrifuges, and within a week, maybe 5 days, you could develop weapons-grade uranium for the core of a bomb. About 25 kilograms is what you need. Within about 2 weeks or 3 weeks, you could develop enough for the core of 10 bombs. Now, that's just the material. It's the long pole in the tent, but now you got to fashion that into a metal that you can shape into the core of a bomb, and you have two choices. The national intelligence estimates in Iran have consistently said it would take about a year for Iran to do that second part, to shape it into a core, what they call an implosion device, the kind we tested 80 years ago at the Trinity test at Los Alamos, take that into the core of a bomb and put it on a missile warhead. Maybe it's a year, maybe it's 5 months. Some people think less. And that one you'd have to test. So absolutely, they could not be confident in that design. It's very complicated. If you saw Oppenheimer, you understand the complications of this, right? So that one you'd have to test. But if you shaped it into a gun assembly device, it's not an implosion. You take one chunk of highly enriched uranium at one end of a tube, another chunk at the other, and you drive them together with explosions. That's the Hiroshima bomb. We never tested that bomb. You were so confident that this design works, you don't have to test it. Iran could do that. In fact, this is chilling. They may already have.
But how would you deliver it? An aircraft, a missile?
Not a missile. It's too big for a missile, but an aircraft, a truck, cargo hull of a ship. You could smuggle it into a port, or the U.S. port, an allied port, or you could do both. You take the short route, you do some to make that crude bomb while you keep working on the missile warhead. I would guess Iran is working on this, and certainly the hardline factions in Iran. Remember, we always talk about Iran does this, Iran does that, as if it's a unitary actor. But there are factions in Iran, and there's always been a faction in the Revolutionary Guard that wants to go to the bomb right now. And you got to believe that their case is strengthened because of these attacks. And they are saying, see, we have to get the only weapon that can protect Iran from Israel and the United States. We have to go now, at least secretly, at least hold it in our back pocket.
Yeah, we don't know. I'm glad you say I can only guess because I mean, you're an expert, but some of this is guesswork as far as trying to figure out what's going on in the mind of the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. Well, since 2003, he has not changed his mind. We know that. Iran hasn't made that final decision to weaponize. They have enriched, but they haven't weaponized. Right. But who knows? Well, I guess we'll find out at some point here if they decide to do that, because if Iran does go nuclear, the only point of having that deterrent capability, as we learned from watching Dr. Strangelove, is you have to let everyone know that you have this. Otherwise, you you can't deter anyone.
Is that the whole point of the doomsday machine is lost? If you keep it a secret, why didn't you tell the world, eh?
Now here is the key question about all of this entire situation and the Ayatollah's miscalculations about remaining a threshold nuclear power rather than an actual nuclear power. The illusion of deterrence, right? Yeah. Obviously, the Ayatollah's miscalculated, but now there's the idea, look at it two ways. The only card we can play is having a bomb. That's the only way to defend ourselves in this world, right? When you look around at places like North Korea, impregnable now, right, with its nuclear stockpile. And we'll get to North Korea and Gaddafi in Libya and his decision to give up his nuclear program. He never had a bomb, but he gave up the program to try to get to one. And now Gaddafi is dead and buried somewhere, and his regime is swept into the dustbin of history. So in this world today, I mean, how do you gauge this idea of deterrence? I mean, you could look at it both ways, right? It can be a deterrent, but also it could provoke powerful countries like Israel and the United States to attack you.
Yes, absolutely right. So that's the line you're walking. You know, I was deeply involved in the process to get diplomacy going between the U.S. and Iran back in 2010, all the way through the JCPOA. So I met with lots of Iranian officials, including Javad Zarif, the foreign minister of Iran at that time. And he was one of the moderates, reformists. He said, look, a bomb doesn't help us. Yes, we could go build a bomb, and then we'd have it. And then what happens? Remember,
we're going to use it, right? I mean, the whole idea is to never use them. But if you have it, you can scare we've talked about this a lot in the past, Joe. The whole idea of MAD is that you can't go there.
So, two parts to this. Yeah. One is, are we going to use that to attack Israel? Now, my family's Jewish. I got a whole lot of my family members who believe absolutely they would use this bomb. They would annihilate Israel. They're crazy. Well,
no, they're not suicidal. They're not suicidal.
Not suicidal.
My view here is that Iran wants the bomb, if it makes that decision to do it, for the same reason any state would today. deterrence. Again, deterrence can be an illusion.
Yeah. So the argument is, and this is what they're thinking, what their top leaders are thinking, if we use this against Israel, Israel's got 80 to 100 nuclear bombs on ships, on submarines, on planes, on missiles. They would annihilate Iran. That would be it. Yeah, we might hit them, but then that's the end of us. That's deterrence. That's why they wouldn't do it. And that's why nobody has done this for 80 years. The second part, they said, is look what happens in the region. We get a bomb. What do you think Saudi Arabia is going to do? We know Saudi Arabia said they would then move to a bomb. Maybe the UAE moves to a bomb as well. And there you go. And suddenly Iran, which can defeat any Arab rival right now, nobody's going to invade Iran. Suddenly they're faced with rivals that could destroy them. Their security situation is worse, not better. That's their thinking. That holds unless you feel that you're in an existential threat. Governments out there who are coming to kill you, as President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu have said. And then you have to throw deterrence to the wind and say, okay, we're going to have to get this bomb before they kill us.
And cover.
Be sure and remember what Bert the Turtle just did, friends, because every one of us must remember to do the same thing. That's what this film is all about. Duck and cover. Paul and Patty know this. No matter where they go or what they do, they always try to remember what to do if the atom bomb explodes right then. It's a bomb. Duck and cover. Sundays, holidays, vacation time, we must be ready every day, all the time, to do the right thing if the atomic bomb explodes. Duck and cover. That's the first thing to do. Duck and cover. First, you duck. And then you cover. You duck and cover tight. Duck and cover under the table. It's a bomb. Duck and cover.
He did what we all must learn to do. You and you and you and you.
You grew up with duck and cover. You grew up in an age before I did when the idea of mushroom clouds, that just wasn't paranoia, that was potential. There was a potential for that. The Berlin crisis that Khrushchev instigated in the late 1950s. The Cuban Missile Crisis that Khrushchev instigated in 1962.
Unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island.
There was a palpable fear of nuclear Armageddon. Matter of fact, it was the Cuban Missile Crisis that made everyone say, okay, we need to step back from the brink and start working on better communication and nuclear arms reduction détente. But today, the whole mushroom cloud, the vision of the mushroom cloud is used by politicians all the time. I think Netanyahu's brought this up several times, hasn't he? The vision of the mushroom cloud.
This is a bomb. This is a fuse. In the case of Iran's nuclear plans to build a bomb, this bomb has to be filled with enough enriched uranium. And Iran has to go through 3 stages. Iran's completed the first stage. Now they're well into the second stage. And by next spring, at most by next summer, at current enrichment rates, they will have finished the medium enrichment and move on to the final stage. From there, it's only a few months, possibly a few weeks, before they get enough enriched uranium for the first bomb.
Where do you use a nuclear weapon? I guess this sounds like a silly question, but just take India and Pakistan, right?
Yes.
They're right on top of each other. The missiles will get to the other side within minutes, right? I was just reading about the Cold War. This is a long question, Joe. Hang in there. The missiles in Turkey, Khrushchev found out that the U.S. missiles, and this is, 1960s era Jupiter missiles that were based in Turkey would reach Moscow in less than 30 minutes. So think of India and Pakistan. Think of Israel and Iran. Think of any states that are right on top of each other today. I mean, it's terrifying to think that a missile would hit within minutes. You might not even have a chance to retaliate. Right. So I guess in that context, maybe the presence of nuclear missiles limits wars from getting out of control, but who can be sure?
That's exactly right. I mean, and this is the danger we face here. It's not just what happens to Iran and whether they are now deciding to accelerate their nuclear program. What does this tell other countries about having nuclear weapons? We're already faced with the potential for proliferation breakouts not from our adversaries, but from our allies in Europe, faced with the idea that Trump is making an alliance with Putin and can no longer be counted on to defend NATO from Russian attack, and therefore it no longer will cover countries in Europe with their nuclear umbrella. Countries like Poland, like Germany, are considering maybe we have to have our own nuclear umbrella. Maybe we have to build our own nuclear weapons. Japan, South Korea, same thing. Add to that the situation now where countries are seeing no one's going to stop the United States or Israel from attacking you. We need weapons that can deter them. We got to go nuclear.
So I don't want to overstate things, but my question to you is the NPT dead? Let me just preface this. I guess this wouldn't be a preface to a question. Joe, I already asked it, but the last country to break the taboo was North Korea. It tested a weapon in 2006. That was their first test, and they had already dropped out of the NPT a few years earlier. So again, that was 2006, about 20 years ago. No one else has developed a bomb since. There are 5 nations allowed under the NPT to have their own nuclear programs: United States, Russia, China, United Kingdom, France. I know this by heart. There are 4 countries that are not allowed to have nuclear weapons, or they exist outside the NPT: Israel, Pakistan, India, and North Korea, the country I just mentioned 2 seconds ago. Yeah. 5 countries host U.S. nuclear weapons on their soil. They're in NATO: Turkey, Belgium, Germany, Italy, Netherlands.
Yes.
And Belarus has Russian weapons on its soil. But that's it. So is the NPT dead, or are we overstating this?
Oh, no, you're not overstating at all. It's not, it's as Mad Max says in The Princess Bride, it's not dead. It's mostly dead.
It's not totally obliterated. It's somewhat obliterated. Yeah.
It's a little bit alive. It's hanging by a thread. And this is the other crisis we're facing. We're looking at the end of the arms control regime we built up, over the last 50, 60 years. U.S. has been leaving these agreements, starting with George W. Bush and the ABM Treaty. George W. Bush smashed the agreed framework with North Korea that had contained North Korea's program. They tested 2 years later. Trump and then Putin pulled out of a whole bunch of treaties during his first term. And here we go. The actions of the last few years have convinced a lot of people that they got to reconsider their nuclear options. And so it's quite possible that we could see the NPT go in the next few years, not just from the actions of our adversaries, but from the actions of our friends.
In South Korea, public opinion is in favor of developing an independent nuclear capability. U.S. missiles were taken out of South Korea a long time ago, it was decades. Why did North Korea believe it needed nuclear weapons?
Because it thought the United States was going to attack it and destroy it. And that wasn't a crazy idea. I was on a podcast the other day with David Sanger from the New York Times, and he said he's been talking to Clinton administration officials who now are reconsidering their choice not to bomb North Korea in 1994 and wishing that they had.
Yeah,
because
they did diplomacy. Yeah, they did diplomacy, and North Korea went along with the diplomacy. There are a lot of agreements. I have a whole timeline here on the North Korean program. Go ahead, yeah.
Yes, but it's funny. Memories are selective, and Sanger had sort of forgotten that for 10 years we contained the program effectively through diplomacy until Bush pulled out of it. So you have this growing nuclear problem, and faith in diplomatic solutions is clearly declining, particularly in the United States. Now, maybe Trump will revisit it. I was actually encouraged by his Truth Social posting on Iran after Iran's token missile response to the U.S. bombing raid. It was quite mild. And Trump responded with this typical insults, very weak response. But he said a couple of words in praise of Iran's caution and said something that no U.S. president has ever said before: God bless Iran. I don't know what this guy's on, but he certainly goes farther than any president has ever done in his U.S. history. And so I thought that maybe we do have a path back to diplomacy. But then comes the revelations from U.S. intelligence officials that the bombing raids didn't work. And we don't know, like you say, but this is based on information from the Central Command, the people closest to the nuclear sites in Iran, the people monitoring the intelligence, have their own sources in there.
Yeah, degraded. Degraded, not obliterated.
Absolutely. No question about it. Brilliantly executed strike. No country in the world could do what we did with our B-2 bombers. Definitely damaged Isfahan, as you mentioned, the site that I visited, the uranium conversion facility, a soft above-ground target. I mean, I got to believe they've left that in ruins, but they didn't hit a whole bunch of underground facilities that we know about, and plus there are underground facilities we don't know about. We don't know the location, and even the ones they hit at Fordow, it doesn't appear that the bombs went deep enough to strike the centrifuges. So this kind of humiliates Trump, and he's fuming about this, and that may push him in the opposite direction. So what looked like an opening after the strike for new rounds of diplomacy to get back to the talks that he had started, that he and Steve Witkoff had ongoing, instead of going back to that, I'm sure he's being pushed by some of his advisors to go back and do more bombing raids, maybe even involving U.S. nuclear weapons, which are really the only weapons that can actually take out these underground sites.
But let's return to the idea of deterrence in the North Korean context, because this matters today, right? From the North Korean perspective, especially after what happened to Gaddafi.
Yeah.
I have an article here with a North Korean government spokesman saying we're not going to wind up, paraphrasing, we're not going to wind up like Libya and Gaddafi. From their perspective, as you say, they're doing this for defensive reasons. And it's also a way of consolidating their own power in an unstable country with an unpopular government, right? And now from South Korea's perspective, I mentioned before, public opinion polls in that country show that they want their own nuclear capability. Mm-hmm. But that idea of we need this for defense could be seen as provocative by North Korea. Get what I'm saying? So
absolutely.
It spirals.
And this is the contradiction of nuclear deterrence. You know, I've studied the history of the spread of nuclear weapons for many years. I wrote a book called Bomb Scare that summarizes why countries go nuclear. Why do they? And the top two reasons are protection and prestige. Look at Britain getting the bomb for prestige, India for prestige. But most countries get it to prevent attacks. That's why we got it. We built the bomb because we thought Hitler was building the bomb and we had to have a response in kind. But other countries then see that as a threat. Soviet Union saw that as a threat to them. And when they get the bomb, we don't see that as them protecting themselves. We see that as a threat. And that's the same with North Korea. They get it to protect themselves. That's not how South Korea or Japan see it. And there's your dynamic.
But where would North Korea fire these missiles? On Seoul and make the southern part of the peninsula uninhabitable for generations? That's what confuses me a little bit here, you know.
Well, absolutely. That's the insanity of nuclear policy. I mean, you get these weapons because you think they're going to add to your power or prestige.
But you can't use them.
But you can't use them.
No, they're city killers. They're not used on military, tactical. You know, the Russian missiles, and Putin has threatened to use tactical nukes in Ukraine. Those are still immensely destructive if they were to be dropped on, say, Kyiv. I mean,
yeah, many times the power of the bomb that destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
One last thing about North Korea. It was in 1985 when it joined the NPT, the non-proliferation regime. In 1991, the United States withdrew its nuclear missiles from South Korea. Trust was being built up. 1992, North and South agreed to denuclearize the entire peninsula. But then shortly after that, North Korea threatens to withdraw from the NPT. It rejected the inspections by the IAEA, those intrusive inspections that countries don't like. But eventually they come around and allow the inspections to start in 1994. Jimmy Carter visited North Korea that year to try to calm tensions. And then in that year, 1994, under Bill Clinton, a deal was struck to freeze Pyongyang's nuclear program. I am getting this timeline from the Council on Foreign Relations.
This agreement will help to achieve a long-standing and vital American objective, an end to the threat of nuclear proliferation on the Korean Peninsula. This agreement is good for the United States, good for our allies, and good for the safety of the entire world.
In 1999, North Korea imposed a missile moratorium. So it looks like all this diplomacy is working.
But why didn't it? We walked away from it.
George W. Bush administration took a harder line because they didn't trust North Korea.
George W. Bush listened to John Bolton, his then national security advisor, and they thought there was a military solution. Again, we don't negotiate with evil, we defeat it. They thought they could take it out one way or the other. Same dynamic with Iran, same dynamic with Libya. And the Libya case, I mean, the Iranians talk about this all the time. The deal with Libya was you give up everything, your nuclear, your chemical, your missile programs, and then we'll recognize you and be friends. Well, that works for about a year. He gives up everything. And then what do? There's for understandable reasons, we start bombing his government, and he ends up slaughtered in a sewer pipe in Libya. Right. So the Iranians look at that, and when Trump comes to them and says, zero enrichment, you can't do anything, you have to give everything up, and then we'll lift sanctions and we'll give you diplomatic recognition, they go, look at Libya.
Those who now argue, in retrospect, we should have left Gaddafi in there, seem to forget that he had already lost legitimacy and control of his country, and we could have, instead of what we have in Libya now, we could have had another Syria in Libya now. The problem with Libya was the fact that there was a failure on the part of the entire international community, and I think that the United States has some accountability for not moving swiftly enough and underestimating the need to rebuild government there quickly.
And Gaddafi was actually operating in good faith there. Hard to say that about some.
Yes.
He saw the landscape in 2003. He saw how the idea that Saddam Hussein had a nuclear program contributed to the end of his regime, although, as I mentioned earlier, the Iraqis had actually dismantled it in 1991. A couple of other things are happening, too, in the North Korean context. President Bush called North Korea part of an axis of evil, but he also pointed to potential violations of that 1994 deal. North Korea did a rocket test and transferred missiles to Iran. Pyongyang did exit the NPT in October 2002 and admitted it was running a secret uranium enrichment program for nuclear weapons. So both sides here, it's true, both sides weren't operating in good faith, I guess. I don't know.
I mean, who could trust making a deal with the United States now, given what we've done over the last 10 years, not to mention this century? You cannot trust the United States, so you have to have a deal that offers you some protections beyond the good word of the United States of America.
Because every 4 years, Kev, a new president changes his mind. Last question here, Joe. Have human beings lost their fear of nuclear weapons?
Some have. Too many have. There's a lot of loose nuke talk. And I don't mean that like the Soviet Union, we don't know where it is. There's a lot of loose talk about using nuclear weapons. And this is what worries me about Trump. And you see people in the MAGA world, sitting members of Congress, calling for nuking Iran. You see some of his big donors calling for as if this is a sign of U.S. power, as if it's not going to be kicking over a nuclear hornet's nest. Yes, some people have definitely lost their fear of nuclear weapons. They think about it the way we were thinking about it in 1945, that it was just a bigger bomb of the kinds we were using, instead of being a fundamental change that could change strategic calculus around the globe.
And when you see talk of other countries like Saudi Arabia, or you even said Poland earlier, thinking that this is the key to their security in a world that is coming apart, well, it returns us to the 50s and 60s when there were no agreements at all, and an idea that we've discussed on past episodes that, let's go more and more and more. Stockpiles up to heavens of nuclear weapons. And until the Cuban Missile Crisis scared the bejesus out of the world and forced a change.
That's exactly right. When John F. Kennedy warned in his debates that if we didn't do something, that we could be facing a world with 15, 20, 25 new nuclear nations, he had read the intelligence. First NIE on nuclear non-proliferation in 1958 and 59 said there were about 16 countries that could develop nuclear weapons. 12 of them were our allies. And this is what you're worried about. We're re-entering this world of nuclear anarchy where many countries will be re-examining their nuclear options. It's an extremely dangerous world, and it really is up to the United States to reverse it. We have to go back to diplomacy and give up the idea of imposing our will on other countries through military force. It just doesn't work.
Now, on the question of disarmament, particularly nuclear disarmament, I must say that I feel that another effort should be made by a new administration in January of 1961 to renew negotiations with the Soviet Union and see whether it's possible to come to some conclusion which will lessen the chances of contamination of the atmosphere and also lessen the chances that other powers will begin to possess a nuclear capacity. There are indications because of new inventions that 10, 15, or 20 nations will have a nuclear capacity, including Red China, by the end of the presidential office in 1964.
On the next episode of History as It Happens, the Israeli and U.S. airstrikes on Iran raise important questions about international law. Were they legal? What is the definition of self-defense? And what is the status of the UN Charter if the most powerful countries in the world don't follow it? Those questions and more next as we report History as It Happens. New episodes every Tuesday and Friday. My newsletter every Friday. Go to Substack and search for History as It Happens.